So about a year ago, we heard that Goldman Sachs was actually looking to sever ties with Apple and the Apple Card because they've been losing billions of dollars in this partnership, which was unexpected. And one of the silver linings was that it looked like Chase was up in line to perhaps purchase that relationship and that partnership. And now a year later, it's looking like Chase is actually going to be doing that. So let's talk about exactly what that means for current Apple Card users and future card users. Let's get into it. But now, before we continue, if you enjoy up-to-date news like this one from the Apple world, definitely consider subscribing to the channel because it motivates us to make more up-to-date content like this. But now let's talk about exactly what this new Chase and Apple Card relationship could look like. So I do briefly want to contextualize what is going on here and why Goldman Sachs is looking to leave this partnership. Because back in 2019, Apple released their Apple Card in partnership with Goldman Sachs, and their biggest selling point was, of course, that it was the physical card was titanium, it was nice, but it was mostly all about the UI elements, how you were able to kind of see how much interest you're paying, see exactly what it looks like to not pay in full, what it looks like to pay in full. And in my opinion, it kind of educated people, including myself, who really weren't educated in this world of credit cards and interest and what it means to just pay minimum balances and things like that. But again, lo and behold, it is now 2025, and Goldman Sachs has reported over $6 billion of losses with the Apple Card. And now that could be for a multitude of different reasons, but at the end of the day, the partnership is not nearly as lucrative, or not lucrative at all, to what they expected when they first initially tried to get into the consumer credit card space alongside Apple. They probably assumed that Apple Card users would be a little bit more on the premium side in terms of a demographic, but because a lot of people with lower credits have been approved for the Apple Card, it ended up being a detriment and a net negative for Goldman Sachs because they're losing a lot of money on this, and people probably aren't making their payments on time or maybe defaulting on their payments, and it just ends up being an ever-ending cycle where Goldman Sachs continues to lose money. Now, I've been an Apple Card user since the very beginning, and this is again 6 years ago now at this point, so my habits in terms of credit cards have changed, and now I rarely use the Apple Card because I prefer the points and miles game versus the cashback game. But when it first came out, it was relatively competitive, right? It was a zero-fee annual card. It gave you 1% cashback on all purchases made with the Apple Card physically, 2% cashback on all Apple Pay purchases, which over those 6 years has now grown that now 90% of merchants here in the US accept Apple Pay as of 2024, which could be even more, meaning that this is almost a 2% catch-all card depending on how you use it. And then you also have 3% cashback on all Apple-related products and services. So that includes hardware like laptops and iPads, but also the services like the Apple Arcades and the Apple TVs and things like iCloud and Apple One. You will get 3% cash back, and that is daily cash back that gets deposited into your Apple Cash account. Now, there's a bunch of other perks that the Apple Card gives you, like their high-yield savings account, which is only accessible if you are an Apple Card member. You also get the ability to do zero-interest payments from 6 months to 12 months on certain Apple hardware, depending on the price points. And then for me, the biggest cherry on top has to be how they built the actual application in the Wallet app, because it lets you see exactly, like I mentioned earlier, how much money you would pay on interest if you don't pay in full, what the consequences of those are, how you're just going to be bleeding money. So it really educates the end user and the consumer as to how to use a credit card correctly, and it even gamifies it a little bit to the point where you feel good, of course, paying off your card on time and in full to make sure you're not carrying any debt. So now, where does Chase come into play, right? Because personally, I'm actually a big fan of the Chase ecosystem. I have a lot of their credit cards. I really take advantage of them. I maximize my points and miles to be able to fly for free, essentially, or get amazing business class flights that I would never pay cash for. So Chase coming into the fold and taking the Apple Card and bringing it into their ecosystem in some form or fashion, I think would be an absolute huge win, because first and foremost, it'll be a little bit more stringent on the acceptance and application process, where they're not just allowing pretty much anybody to get this Apple Card. And B, depending on how they end up playing this could maybe get intertwined into the Chase ecosystem, or they could keep it as a standalone product. And 9to5Mac has reported that Apple's been negotiating with Chase since early last year, and it has accelerated drastically over the last month or so. One of the biggest issues with this purchase, though, is that Apple Card is currently holding over $20 billion of consumer debt, which is absolutely insane, and then an additional $2.45 billion in reserves for even further future loan losses with Apple Card current users. And again, if you are going to purchase that, and if you're Chase, you are purchasing all that debt as well. Yes, you're purchasing a bunch of consumers and a bunch of credit card users, and eventually maybe they could turn that profit and turn it around, but you are taking on a lot of risk, taking on almost $22 billion worth of debt. But now let's say this Chase partnership does happen, this buyout does happen. What does that mean for Apple Card users? There's a couple different routes that can happen here when it comes to what happens to the Apple Card. So what I do think is going to stay is the immediate perk. So that 1%, 2%, 3% cashback on those certain categories, I do think will remain, Chase already has a few credit cards that are in the zero fee kind of category that give you similar cashback options, like the Chase Freedom Unlimited that gives you 1.5 cashback on everything ever purchased, as well as 3% cashback on dining and pharmacies. So getting up to 3% cashback isn't unheard of in the Chase world, and it also will remain zero fee in my opinion. Now, they might change some of the things like the no late fee policy because it's hard for companies in this credit card world to make money, but you'll still probably hold on to the zero foreign transaction fees, and they'll kind of keep the fees to a minimum if they do add any. And then another thing that's questionable and up in the air is going to be that high yield savings account. Apple a few years ago did introduce that high yield savings account, and it has been going down little by little in terms of how much you're getting paid out, but Chase is not known for giving a high yield savings account. They don't really have that product option, and if they do, it's not really known and it's not really popular. So they could completely just ixnay that and get rid of it. Of course, they're not going to just delete your money from that application or from the high yield savings account, but it'll be reduced from around the 3.6% that it's at right now to maybe like a 0.01%, which is what Chase usually offers. And then finally, I want to see if Chase is going to keep this thing in a silo or if they're going to bring it and intertwine it with the rest of their ecosystem. Chase does have co-branded cards, and for the most part, they do stay in their own silos. So for example, they have United cards, they have Hyatt cards, and they each, even though you can go into your Chase portal and pay them off under the same umbrella and they're easy to manage, when it comes to the point systems and the cashback and things of that nature, they are completely siloed. So for instance, if you do have a Chase Hyatt card, when you are spending money on that card and you're earning Hyatt points, those Hyatt points show up directly in your Hyatt account. They do not show up in your Chase account. That could also be the case for the Apple card when it does come into the Chase ecosystem because it is a co-branded card. But another thing to note here is that with the cashback cards that Chase does offer, like the Freedom Unlimited, like the Freedom Flex, even though those are cashback cards, if you hold one of Chase's other cards, you then earn Chase Ultimate Reward points that can be exchanged for cash or can be used to then transfer out to partners. So I could see the Apple card being a cashback card that will earn Chase Ultimate Reward points that can then be transferred out and combined with other parts of the Chase ecosystem, which is what I hope happens. If that does happen, my Apple card will be used immensely more than it is right now. The only thing that I use my Apple card for right now are for the monthly services that I pay for, like the Apple Ones of the world, any in-app purchases that I do, any hardware products that I buy. That's the only thing that I buy with my Apple card. I do not use it for any other spending that does not involve Apple because for me, it just really isn't worth it. I'd much rather earn Chase Ultimate Reward points. But that's going to do it for this recap. So basically what you need to know is that it looks like Chase will be purchasing this Apple Card partnership. They're at least first in line. American Express and Synchrony are still kind of up there, but it looks like Chase is really pulling forward in terms of they're going to be the ones getting it. But then secondly, it's still up in the air as to what that means. The immediate is not to worry, right? The immediate will be that everything's going to remain the same and Chase will slowly roll out new benefits or new changes happening to the Apple Card. And then if you do not have an Apple Card and maybe your credit score isn't the best, I would actually recommend applying for it now because I think Chase's application process will be a little bit more stringent and your credit score will need to be a little bit higher in order to get approved. But that's all speculation. It's just something that I've experienced when it comes to Chase. Chase is definitely more stringent when it comes to applying for their credit cards versus the Apple Card. I've seen people with like 570 credit scores get accepted for the Apple Card, but that'll do it for this video. Let me know in the comment down below what you think. Do you have an Apple Card? Are you excited about this? Do you hope that American Express makes a bigger push towards the end? Always curious to know your thoughts. Leave a dolphin if you made it to the end. If you want to watch more videos like this one, check out one of these videos right here. Until next time, I'm Fernando. Peace, everyone.